15.
Broadcasting across the state of Wisconsin on the Civic Media Radio Network and around the world on the Civic Media app. This is the Dom Salvia Show. And now, here's your host, Dom Salvia.
Actually, it's not Dom Salvia. I'm Matt Rothschild, subbing in for Dom, and I have a guest co-host, Angela Lang, joining me here all across the Civic Media Radio Network. Angela Lang, of course, is the founder and executive director of BLOC. That's Black Leaders Organizing for Communities. Please join our conversation by text or by phone by dialing 855-752-4842. That's 855-75-CIVIC. And we've got Representative Mark Pocan in a second. Before we get to him, we have a giveaway for you, and Jess is going to tell you all about it.
We do indeed. It's time for the grown-up gift list. That's not the adult gift list. It's the grown-up gift list on Civic Media Radio Network. Right now, in this hour, you can text in through the app. That's 855-752-4842. But really, just do it through the app. It's better. The code word, stockings. Is it plural? I think it's plural. Stockings. For your chance to win. Oh, no, it's not plural. Just stocking. STOCKING. Stocking for your chance to win $100 cash. So throughout the hour, you may do this. If you do not get a bounce back text, that means that you spelled something wrong. So make sure that you spell it right. Stocking. We'll remind you throughout the hour.
Like hang your stocking under the mantle for Christmas. All right.
Not something I'm familiar with, so.
Me neither, though we do both Hanukkah and Christmas at the Rothschild House. So anyway, here we go. Let's get right to Representative Mark Pocan. Thanks for joining the show, Representative. It's great to see you and great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I need to get your reaction, of course, to the fatal shooting at Abundant Life in Madison on Monday. What was your first reaction? What's your reaction now?
More of a stunning disbelief, that here we are, 2024, and I would argue the greatest nation on the planet. And yet we're the nation that has the highest amount of school shootings and mass shootings by far of any other country. And now this is the second this year, by the way, in my district. Don't forget, we had the Mount Horeb incident with the young, the juvenile with a pellet gun and got shot by the police. We got to admit we got a problem, right? And we don't. And I think that's the first and foremost thing that we just have to look at. I go to the floor and you do a moment of silence and there's no moment of action. We offer thoughts and prayers, which may provide some relief for the family and the community, but thoughts and prayers never lead to anything. Therefore, they don't have the value. It's become this thing we say in Washington that means, by the way, we're not going to address gun violence. And I just think, we have to have a much bigger conversation about the need to understand that being number one in this category is not a good thing.
What is the action that you want to see?
Understanding that we are uniquely on the planet, the country that has the most shootings, and that we've got to figure out what's wrong. Is it the type of guns? Is it too many guns? There's more guns than people here. Is it mental health issues? Is it a combination? Is it that the gun manufacturers run the NRA? NRA is not the people who belong to it, who want to, have the family tradition of hunting and their rifle. No one's after that rifle. But the NRA's funding comes from the gun manufacturers who are just trying to make boatloads of money, and they don't care what happens with the product they have. And I think, we just have to have a real conversation, because in lieu of a real conversation means nothing, which means out of the 480 mass shootings this year alone, you're going to have more and more and more, and it will come back again to Wisconsin, and it'll be everywhere else in the country, and that's just unacceptable.
I mean, it is. Go ahead, Angela.
I was just going to say, I appreciate you saying that, we just have to figure out what the problem is, right? And a lot of folks want to make this an opportunity, I think, for more than what it is. And, on the things that you listed, what I didn't hear is, more school resource officers or more police in schools or more metal detectors. And I think folks are seeing that as an opportunity. But, as people have said, why are we talking about even having a need for those things in the first place?
Yeah.
So can you kind of talk about this kind of knee-jerk reaction of saying this is why we need more police in schools, and maybe that's not the answer?
And that was the first answer from law enforcement I was so proud of back
Yeah.
home. When I heard, they said, well, shouldn't we fortify these schools more? They're like, no, we shouldn't need to. Like, we're not addressing the problem. You could fortify every school and every hospital and every playground and every public building and every mall. But that's not addressing the problem, which is we have an addiction to guns. We have an epidemic of gun violence. And if we have an epidemic like COVID, we all did something about it. Here we have an epidemic that we are just ignoring. And, in this case, it's really tough because the shooter was a 15-year-old girl and they're looking for a reason in a manifesto. It's a 15-year-old girl. You may not get that. And I think that's a real
Yeah.
issue.
I see we have Tom from LA on the phone.
Hey, Mark, can you hear me?
Yes. How you doing?
Hey, good, Mark. I wanted to compliment you. You were on Tom Hartman's show. Hopefully, maybe some of my pushing is doing something. But you called yourself like 2 or 3 times today the party of FDR. We need everyone in Congress to be saying that they are FDR Democrats. We need to teach them, if they don't know the history of who he was in the New Deal, then we need to teach it. But I just wanted to compliment you because I usually give you guff on blue sky and stuff like that, asking you if you're a FDR Democrat. But today, it really made me happy that you actually said that, and that you're moving in that direction. One problem I had with Bernie is he let them buy into the thing about him being a socialist, and he never did take the FDR mantle.
Yeah, no, I agree, Tom. If there's a lesson coming out of November, one lesson I think we've all accepted is that most of the undecided voters, or almost at least half of them, don't get their information from traditional TV media, and we need to be different than how the consultants want us to spend money. They make money when they place it there, but we're starting a podcast in January, for example, because we're going to start having longer conversations about some of the issues that I talk about, and we want to put more information out there. But the other thing that I'm not sure everyone's accepted yet, and that's why we're talking about it, is we have to go back to those core economic issues. We lost people making $30,000 to $100,000 in the election, which we've never done in the last 4 or 5 cycles, this election cycle. And it's because Donald Trump lied, but we're used to that. But for many, he said he would do whatever, and they're paying too much, just like globally, in 12 countries, I think, or 14 countries, whoever was in charge lost power in the last year because coming out of COVID, we've had global inflation. But we should talk about, and we didn't enough, raising the minimum wage and childcare, because that's what people need to be able to have jobs and to work, and healthcare for their families. Because if you don't have that, what do you have? Look what just happened with the shooting. Look at the outpouring of people who are upset with how healthcare is delivered, or better yet, not delivered, and the frustration we're seeing. Those are all core economic, I would argue, FDR type issues. And when our party proves that once again we are the party for the average person, the average working person, then we're going to have earned our place back. But right now, that really hurt us, I think, and we just need to really reinforce who we are.
I think part of the problem, Representative Pocan, was that Democrats didn't demonstrate what deliverables they've already given people and what deliverables they'll promise and can follow through with. A lot of people don't understand, how they've benefited from, other than the Affordable Care Act, from a Democrat being president. Part of it is the minimum wage hasn't gone up. Part of it is, people are struggling so hard on rent issues. I know Kamala Harris tried to address that, dealing with the housing shortage, but when people can't pay their rent, or rent is 30%, 40%, 50% of what they're bringing in, this is, and grocery bills are going up. They're just getting squeezed. I saw a cartoon from the old wobbly industrial workers of the world from 100 years ago that had workers in a vice. On top was low wages, and on bottom was high rent, and people were just getting squeezed, and they're still getting squeezed. And I don't think Kamala Harris, though I hate to criticize her because I think she ran a really hard race and gave it her all.
Amount of time, right? She wasn't building it from the very beginning like you normally would. So I agree. I mean, I try not to have a a hard and fast opinion on it, but I do have a hard and fast opinion that unless we're the party that fights for the average person, there's always going to be these wedge issues that Republicans are so good at. Now look at this administration. A record number of billionaires are going to be telling us, I mean, talk about an oligarchy, right?
Yeah.
This is in action. It's going to be real life. And, part of what we got to do is also make sure we're defending everyone that he's going to attack. We know Donald Trump has a tendency to not do what he says, and 95% of what he says, he doesn't deliver on. But the 5%, we got to make sure we're watching out for each other. And that does mean for each other. So maybe you're not transgender, but if he's attacking the transgender community, don't forget, next it might be, people who are immigrants. And next it might be low-income seniors, and they want to go after Social Security. And eventually you've got no one there for you if you're not backing every single person that he's attacking. So this is our real chance for some real solidarity.
Yeah, we need that solidarity. And I know Angela Lang's been talking about that, wrapping our arms around trans folks and immigrants in our communities and how important that is. I mean, I'm worried about how bad it is going to get under Trump, both here in Wisconsin and nationwide. And I'm frustrated by columnists in the New York Times who are saying, well, this too shall pass. Well, it might pass eventually, but there are a whole bunch of people who might get hurt. I mean, what should Wisconsinites expect to deal with here?
Well, and that's the thing. We just have to be ready for whatever. So on Inauguration Day, I'm not going to go to the inauguration. It's Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I'm going to try to live in the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr., which means we're going to do some service. We're going to deliver some Meals on Wheels at lunch, because honestly, that's one of the populations that's going to be affected. And we're going to meet with postal workers, because now they're talking about privatizing the postal service. We're going to meet with people who are in that immigrant community that he might be trying to kick out of the country. We're going to meet with folks in the LGBTQI community who are being attacked and could see lots of attacks in this administration. And we really want to make sure that people know we really are listening, and that we really are going to help organize folks. But we all got to fight like hell, and we all got to have each other's backs. And that, I think, is the part I really want to stress, because an injury to any of us is an injury to all of us. And we've got to make sure we live that credo.
Absolutely. That's Representative Mark Pocan. Can you hang around in the next segment, or do you have to fly?
I can go for another segment, because the Republicans are so inept, we don't know when their next vote is.
Terrific. You're listening to the Dom Salvia Show on the Civic Media Radio Network. We'll be right back with Representative Mark Pocan.
Not to put too fine a point on it. Say I'm the only bee in your bonnet. Make a little birdhouse in your soul. While you're at it, leave the nightlight on inside the birdhouse in your soul. Not to put too fine a point on it. Say I'm the only bee in your bonnet. Make a little birdhouse in your soul. While you're at it, leave the nightlight on inside the birdhouse in your soul. Not to put too fine a point on it. Say I'm the only bee in your bonnet. Make a little birdhouse in your soul.
30 seconds.
Hey, Matt Rothschild with you on the Dom Salvia Show. Dom's off today, so I'm here guest hosting along with Angela Lang. Angela Lang's the founder and executive director of Block, Black Leaders Organizing for Communities, and we're talking with Mark Pocan. We'll be back to Mark in 1 second. You're free to join the conversation at 855-752-4842. That's 855-75-CIVIC. But first, we have a giveaway for you, and Jess is going to do the duty.
We do indeed have a giveaway. If you've been listening, I did misspeak a little bit at the beginning. The giveaway is stocking, singular. So that's STOCKING for our grown-up gift list all across Civic Media. This is a statewide contest. We're giving away things 4 times a day, either $100 in cash or an overnight stay at Chula Vista. This hour, it's a $100 cash giveaway. Again, that word is stocking. Go ahead and text that in through the Civic Media app. You have until the end of the hour. Back to you, Matt.
Thanks, Jess. We're here with Representative Pocan. You were just saying before the break that Republicans can't get their act together. Imagine that. One of the reasons they can't get their act together is that Elon Musk is throwing his weight around like he is in charge of everything. I saw that today he was threatening any Republican lawmaker who doesn't go along with the reconciliation bill to keep the government open. Otherwise, there's a shutdown on Friday. What do you make of this outsized role that Elon Musk is playing in this upcoming administration?
Well, clearly he thinks he bought the presidency. He's going to own it. So, he literally, before Donald Trump, by a number of hours, decided to kill the bipartisan compromise continuing resolution to keep government open. The problem is Elon Musk knows about as much about how the federal government works as, I know about the best hair products, right? It's just not something that's what we know Elon Musk for. He suggested that we wait till January 20th when the president comes in. If you shut government down for a month and everyone's trying to go home for the holidays, think about all the federal things that would be not happening during this time. I mean, it's beyond idiotic, but it's Elon Musk. He's rich. He doesn't have to be right. He's rich, and he just bought himself a president, and now Donald Trump's got to recognize he's got a daddy. And once he does, it's going to be an epic fight someday they're going to have. But for now, Trump is just going to carry the water for this guy.
Yeah, Elon Musk is Scrooge this Christmas, that's for sure. We've got Joe from Madison on the phone. Let's take Joe's call. She's one of our most informed callers.
Oh, I hope so, although this may seem a little bit off base, but I hope that you'll consider this. Representative Pocan, thanks so much for being on the show, and hope you can make it again and again. One of the things I so appreciate about you as a representative is your energy and your humor. You just keep going, which is so helpful. And I would have a thought on, I think the idea of having a podcast is absolutely great. I would really encourage you to have a lot of music and a lot of people coming in on that with stars and people that you can get to add to that, not just facts, but also music and energy to that. And it makes me wonder, I'm going to throw something at you and consider this. Part of the reason I think that people are glued to Trump is because you just don't know what this nutball is going to do next. He's entertaining in that way, in that he's unexpected, and you just can't believe it. Even if it's horrifying, you just can't believe it. I would propose to you, there was a public television station. It was the Twin Cities Public Television Station. And as part of getting ready for a mayoral race they had, I think it was St. Paul. They had a game show. They had a quiz show, and the idea of it was, what do you need to know to be mayor? And so they had these questions prepared, and it was a game show with a funny little theme and balloons and great set and all that. This may sound kind of odd, but one of the questions I would ask is, how much is this going to cost? If they privatize the post office, how much is it going to cost? There's a question for you. If they privatize the Veterans Health Service, what's that going to cost the average veteran? And I think it may sound goofy or weird, but honestly, I would tune into a game show that gave me that information in a cheery, upbeat way, that wasn't dour, but instead sort of said, can you guess this? With the idea that it's unexpected. One of the reasons I think people like sporting games so much is because you don't know how it's going to end. Even you just don't know who's going to win and what plays are going to happen. And thus, I think that's part of the interest in game shows and things that are just done live or live on tape. So anyway, I know this sounds a little odd, but I'm just sort of thinking that it doesn't do enough to just simply tell the facts or tell the story. We gotta do more. And so I would throw this kind of wacky off the wall idea at you to see if there might be some ways to play off of that. So
Thanks,
that's my
Joe.
2 cents for today, and thanks for all you do, sir.
I love that.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So when I look at what it takes to run a radio station, I don't have that. So don't look for great production value, right? I don't know if I'm going to have the sound effects and the music and all that, but what we are going to do is try to do a deep dive on some subjects like Medicare Advantage, like privatizing the Postal Service. We want to get people like Robert Reich. We've already reached out to him to be on the program. Mark Ruffalo, who grew up in Kenosha, where I grew up. I mean, so there's a lot of people out there we want to bring in, but have a longer conversation, plus maybe a few fun questions too. Like, I would love to know, if we had an at-large member of Congress, who each person might want to put on and why. Because sometimes it's just sharing other places for people to get information, because that is how we get information now, through non-traditional ways. So I'm going to do my best. It probably won't be quite as exciting maybe as Donald Trump is, but we're going to get the information out, and I appreciate your comments, Joe.
And I would say too, at Block, we've done like Civics Jeopardy online, and during lockdown, there was like this online template, and it was all civics questions. And we had, Senator Tammy Baldwin on, and we did it on Zoom and Facebook Live. And so I think there's a way to get education out that is super fun, but also right now, when we're living in this age of mis and disinformation, how do we make sure we're breaking through that noise of the ads and the mailers and stuff? So I look forward to hearing your podcast.
Thank you. Mid-January, I think, is what we're shooting for right now. But
yeah,
I'm looking forward to it too, because there's too many subjects. Like on your show, I would love to talk about Medicare Advantage. We get so many calls from people who get screwed over by insurance companies. Private insurance, that's what Medicare Advantage is. It's not Medicare only. Medicare is Medicare. You have to get prior authorization. They turn down millions of people a year.
Yeah, we got to have that conversation another time.
Yeah,
because we're out of time. But thanks so much for being the guest today. No worries.
We'll have you back on.
The Dom Salvia Show. Yeah, definitely have you back on.
Thanks
have a nice
so much,
holiday.
Guys. Appreciate it. Happy holidays.
Thanks. You too.
Hello, Hans. Can you hear me?
Hi there.
All right. I can hear you.
Hey, Hans. Good to see you. Nice to hear from you.
Yeah. Hi, man.
Thanks for doing this.
No, not at all. I figured as many miles as you've traveled on behalf of the gerrymandering cause up in my neck of the woods, the least I could do is show up for a Zoom.
Oh, that's nice of you. I'll ask you about gerrymandering. I don't want it to be about me. So we can just keep that between us, because that's not
Sure.
why I want you on the show. But yeah, we've done a lot of that dog and pony show. I was doing it at a time when I thought we were never, at least not till 2030, going to get success. So that's kind of the miracle of this year, and which I might ask you about.
Sure. All right.
And you reached out to Civic Media, in the last month to get on. Is that what happened?
on Dom's show, I did because he referenced me in one of his shows, and I don't listen to his show, but somebody else told me, hey, they were talking about you on this Dom Salvia show or whatever. And I said, oh, okay. So I listened to it, and I didn't get directly accused of being a Trump voter, but it sounded like that kind of. So it was an opportunity for me to talk about immigration, and I'll take any opportunity I can to talk about that topic. So
Yeah, we certainly want to talk about that. But we might start with gerrymandering anyway.
sure, whatever you want, whatever you want.
One minute.
Do we need another promo, Jess?
Yep.
All right.
$30 seconds.
Hey, Matt Rothschild here on the Dom Salvia Show. Dom's off today. I'm co-hosting today with Angela Lang of Block, and we've got a guest who is an old friend of mine, Hans Breitenmoser, a dairy farmer and a progressive from Lincoln County, who we're going to bring on in just a second. But I want to invite you to join the conversation at 855-752-4842. You can call or text. That's 855-75-CIVIC. And we've got an offer for you that Jess is going to deliver right now.
We sure do. Our grown-up gift list. There are 2 days remaining in that, and the rest of this hour. You have 25 minutes left to get out your phone, open the Civic Media app, and text in our keyword for the hour, stocking, STOCKING. I hear that people hang them up by the fireplace and do stuff with it, but it's not for your feet. Anyways, you can stuff your stocking with $100 in cash if you text in that keyword, stocking, STOCKING, in the next 25 minutes. Back to you, Matt.
Thanks, Jess. Hans Brayton Moser. Welcome to the show, Hans.
Hey, Matt, how we doing?
I'm doing all right. Hanging in there. You know, it was rough coming off the election, but I'm getting my sea legs back again and getting my voice back again because, you know, we got to fight this, of course. And you're a fighter, longtime fighter. You know, for the listener out there, Hans and I worked together pretty hard for a couple of years there in this battle to get fair maps in Wisconsin. I drive up to Merrill and we do some sessions with the League of Women Voters and other folks in the community to try to raise awareness about the issue of fair maps. And you were on the Lincoln County Board there at the time, and you were able to get a measure through the Lincoln County Board. And it's not a blue board by any stretch. You were able to get it through that board wanted fair maps. And then you were a leader in the effort to get the whole Wisconsin Counties Association on board for fair maps. That was part of the effort at the county level and at the grassroots level that led to this victory for fair maps. And Hans, I just wanted to ask you what lesson you draw from all this, because you know, I'm a skeptical person, and for a while there I thought we weren't going to see fairer maps until 2030 maybe. And yet it happened. So what is the lesson of that, do you think?
Boy, I don't know. That's a long history lesson, I suppose. I mean, you know, I was on the Lincoln County Board for 10 years. I lost my election a couple of years ago now, but back in 2017, you know, I just kind of concluded that some of the issues that we deal with at local government has to do with the fact that our state representatives aren't listening to us. And I couldn't quite wrap my head around that until I understood how gerrymandered we were. And so we thought, well, you know, let's use this little tiny platform to write a resolution. Obviously, these resolutions are kind of rhetorical in terms of they don't have any teeth, but we thought at our county level, it made sense to write a resolution to insist that the state has a nonpartisan procedure for drawing these legislative and congressional district lines. And what was, I think the thing that was interesting about that was we did it in Lincoln County, Wisconsin, and so it came out of some place where people didn't expect it to come out of, and that helped inspire other counties to do the same thing. And you know, as a result of that little spark, and certainly so many people jumping on, and obviously all the hard work that you've done through the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign and all the others, we did get to a lot of traction with that, and so yeah, it took some time, but we ultimately did move the needle a little bit, didn't we?
Yeah, everyone using their own little platforms. I love that expression you had there. That's what we got to do.
Yeah,
and sometimes it works out in surprising ways, and we get that reform sooner than we thought we would. Sometimes we don't get it until later on. But
yeah,
we're not going to get it if we don't use our little platforms. That's for sure.
well, absolutely. And of course, the main thing that we need to pound home now is that we can't just sit still, because while we've moved the needle, we haven't really accomplished anything concrete. I mean, this can get taken away from us so quickly. So we just need to keep pushing as hard as we can to finally get this enshrined in the Constitution so we quit screwing around.
So you're pushing a constitutional amendment to ban gerrymandering once and for all, correct?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I don't see any other way to get it to stick, right? Because, I mean, these things move like a pendulum back and forth, and with the whims of politicians and so forth. And so if we sit here and say, well, hey, we got fairer maps now, then I think a lot of people that were fighting for that maybe get the impression that, oh, well, there, we did it and we can walk away. No, we didn't do it. This gives us a toehold that we can move the needle all the way to where it needs to be, and then nail that needle down. And the only way that's going to happen is if we get enough legislators down in Madison who take this seriously, who are done with this nonsense, that they will get a constitutional amendment or something along those lines, so we can get a truly nonpartisan procedure done. And, we haven't even talked about the congressional district lines. I mean, that's obviously a big one as well.
A lot of work to be done there. The other issue that I've been hearing you advocate on lately, Hans, is this issue of immigrant rights and the concern that you have with Trump and his mass deportation rhetoric, what that's going to do to the dairy industry where you are, and more importantly, to the human beings who work there. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reality of Wisconsin and reality of the United States is that, agriculture, construction, hospitality, meat packing, none of these things work without immigrant labor. It's just a simple fact. And so the idea that so many of these folks have been demonized and used by, politicians like Donald Trump and Tom Tiffany in my congressional district, and this nonsense about, rapists and murderers and so forth and so on, it irritates me. I was going to use a different term, but this is a broad audience here, so we'll try and behave. But when you work alongside people that have not been handed a great situation, that have left their homelands because of cartels and because of lack of opportunity and because of all these things, legitimate reasons to move on to the United States and find a better life, you work alongside these people and start to understand the amount of grace and so forth that they have when they would have every right to be, ornery as heck. And then those same people are demonized. Well, I just can't let that stand without saying something about it.
And I think, what I'm hearing is a lot of like class consciousness too, right? Is that like working class, including dairy farmers, need to come together. And I think in a state like Wisconsin, there's always forces that are pitting kind of this urban and rural divide. And, oh, those are dairy farmers, or, oh, those are immigrants. That's not me. Why should I care? How do you kind of talk about the statewide impact of why everyone should care? One, it's the morally right thing to do to care about your fellow human. But even outside of that, if for whatever reason people aren't moved, why should all Wisconsinites actually care, even from like an economic perspective?
Because all Wisconsinites eat, Angela.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't know what else you want. Just, you don't need a PhD in economics to connect these dots. This is not rocket science here, folks. If you have eaten today, if you plan on eating tomorrow, then thank an immigrant, because I'm here to tell you the dairy industry stops in a big, fat, ugly way right now if you may wave your magic MAGA wand and chase all the immigrants, quote, home. Then the dairy industry ceases to exist. And guess what else does? The packing industry. How am I going to sell my cows if my employees have to leave? I'm going to sell my cows. I'm here to tell you, I'm done. I'm going to hang it up. Where am I going to sell my cows if the packing plants can't slaughter them? Explain to me how this works. I'm listening.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I'm wondering if some of your employees are petrified right now.
Well, that's an interesting question, and I've asked, I've been asked that question, and I've, had these conversations. But what my answer to that question is this, Matt. Again, speaking broadly, you're dealing with a cohort of people who have been faced in their home countries with poverty and crime, have had to leave and be apart from their families. They've had some stuff to deal with. This is, speaking broadly, a pretty resilient bunch of folks. They're not real likely to start whining and complaining. They look at this situation and say, okay, well, we're going to come to work tomorrow and we're going to do the best we can. And we're going to see what happens.
Do you think Trump is blustering like some people are suggesting in the papers, or is he going to follow through with this mass deportation, or is he going to have some displays of what I think are displays of sadism, to put it sharply? How do you see this playing out?
I mean, I think part of the angst is that, this is a fellow that's proven himself to be pretty erratic and a little tough to figure out. This is a guy that has no grand philosophical bent, right? It's just a matter of, oh, what do I feel like today? And who's gonna brown nose me today? That's the direction that it's gonna go. It's like stick your finger in the air and see which way the wind's blowing. So I don't know. I wish I had a good answer for you. My hope is that the bluster is just that, and they make examples of some actual criminals and deport those folks, and then maybe we can calm down. But what they should be thinking about, I don't care if Republicans or Democrats, what they should be working on is some actual reform so we can get back to an immigration policy that works for this country and the people who come here.
What would that reform look like?
Oh, I think there's plenty of ways to move that needle. My parents came here from Switzerland in 1968. It wasn't a big deal. I mean, and I'm not even suggesting that this has to be a path to citizenship, although I would be completely in favor of that. But the bottom line is we don't have a birth rate that keeps up with the demand for people to fill this economy and work in this economy. So why wouldn't we have an immigration reform that encourages, or at least doesn't discourage, people from coming to this country? We should be welcoming these people just like generations before us have, because it strengthens our communities. It strengthens us culturally, and it strengthens us economically. This is not that hard to figure out. But if xenophobia and stupidity get in the way, then here we sit.
We've got Keith from Broadhead on the phone. Let's listen to Keith. Keith, what's on your mind?
Good afternoon, guys. I'm going to say something perhaps a little bit cynical here, and I apologize if it may be beyond. The difference between the previous generations of immigrants in this country, going back to Italians and Irish and all the way back, is that they generally look like us. They're European. Before that, of course, it was the African Americans. They were not immigrants. They were slaves. They didn't look like us. So I'm going to be a little cynical and say that I think that's a good part of it, unfortunately. And then I wanted to ask the gentleman, you're in Lincoln County area. Those dairy farmers have to know that what you're saying is true. In their souls, they have to know that without the immigrants, they have no workforce. How is it that they still voted for Trump? I don't get it. I just don't understand this.
Good question from Keith from Broadhead. Thanks for the call, Keith. Hans, when you meet neighbors who are dairy farmers who had big Trump signs out in their fields, how do you make sense of that?
I'm going to share a little exchange that I had with a fellow that I know. He's our hoof trimmer that comes to our farm once a month, and he works in the dairy industry every day. Good guy, solid guy, volunteer firefighter, just salt of the earth guy. And I was complaining to him about this, because I know he votes Republican. And he said that I made a joke. I said, well, pretty soon you and I are going to be out of work too if they chase everybody, quote, back home. And he said, well, I wouldn't worry about that. They're only going to send back the illegals. I said, dude, do you understand that the people you work with shoulder to shoulder, a lot of them, their documentation is dubious at best?
Hans,
he didn't get that.
I'm going to cut you off right there and hope that you can hang on and give us, the rest of that conversation you had with them. You're listening to the Dom Salvia Show. That's Hans Breitenmoser, dairy farmer, Lincoln County. We'll be right back on the Dom Salvia Show.
All right, we're going to have to do one more promo for the text to win at the top of the next segment, and then we're done with it.
Okay, and then we'll go back to Hans about this question from Keith from Broadhead, because it was a good one in that conversation.
1 minute. $15.
Hey, Matt Rothschild here on the Dom Salvia Show. Dom's off today, and I'm here with my co-guest host, Angela Lang of Block, and we're talking with Hans Breitenmoser of Lincoln County. Is a dairy farmer, former member of the Lincoln County Board, and was a champion of fair maps, forever to his credit. You can join the conversation here, 855-752-4842. That's 855-75-CIVIC on the Civic Media Radio Network. And we've got something for you, the listener, that Jess is going to tell you all about.
Last call for today's Text to Win contests. If you're interested in $100 cash, I know I am, but I'm not allowed to enter into this. But you can, through the Civic Media app, simply pull up the app, choose the station that you're listening to right now, and text in the word stocking, STOCKING, for your chance to win $100 on our grown-up gift list. This is a statewide contest, so wherever you are in the state of Wisconsin, go ahead and text that in. Tomorrow, we will have another day of gifts. And then only one more day remaining. So you have 7 minutes left today. Get out your phone, text it in, win a prize. Back to you, Matt.
Thanks, Jess. Love the vocals. Hans, we had that great call from Keith from Broadhead wondering about your fellow dairy farmers. And you were talking about the guy who deals with your cow's hoofs. And he didn't think it was going to affect him. Was that what the short of it was?
Yeah. Well, and before I forget, to lead in with Hendrix and then give away $100. You guys have the coolest radio show on the radio right now.
Right? Great song choice.
Yeah. So I'm sharing this story because it was a little bit of an epiphany for me, right? This fellow works in the industry. He votes Republican, and he was maybe he had maybe some light got in there. Good guy, smart guy, decent human being, but he's been so led to believe that the quote illegal immigrants are all these scary images that he's been seeing on television, and whether it's Fox quote news or whether it's advertisements for Tom Tiffany or so forth and so on. So the notion that some of the folks that he works with all the time aren't here legally, honest to God, never occurred to him. And the reason is because they're good people. They show up for work. They do a great job. They're friendly. They're hardworking. They can't possibly be here without proper documentation. So he had an epiphany that day, and so did I, because I was sitting here asking the same question you guys after the election. How can all these people be such xenophobic, racist blockheads? This is impossible. I know these people. They're not terrible people, but they're misinformed people. They're misguided people, and that doesn't make them evil, but that makes our job all the more difficult / important to really get the message out, to make sure that people understand that some things aren't as they seem, and immigration policy just needs to be changed by people who are in positions of power to do so.
I mean, how do we get that message out? I mean, that is the question. And sure, Civic Media, we're trying to do all we can here. But a lot of it is person to person. I think about the great nonviolent revolution in this country over the last 50 years, which was the gay rights movement. That occurred because people went person to person, family member to family member, and got it done. And I just, maybe we do need to, maybe not talk religion at the dinner table, but talk politics at the dinner table, because we got to bring people around. Do you have any hints there, Hans, as to how to move the needle on this?
I don't know, Matt. I'm a simple dairy farmer. I'm not a sociologist or anything like that. I don't know. I think it's just having these conversations as often as we can and being honest with one another and starting to shed light, where we can and when we can. I don't have any grand scheme. It's just conversations, I think.
And
Well,
I think
don't buy go ahead, Angela. I just was going to say I don't buy the simple dairy farmer shtick, but go ahead, Angela.
That's what I was going to say, because I feel like, we clearly have gotten to this moment and it's been brought up before, the campaign consultants and, the folks that never step foot in our communities, whether it's in the north side of Milwaukee, in the Northwoods, or on the dairy farm, but they somehow know what the messages are, right? And I think it's so easy for folks to kind of dehumanize folks these days if they are so not used to being in community or in relationship with each other. So I think what I'm hearing and speaking to is just like being able to have these conversations, because once we are able to see each other as people and not as villains, as the news or the media may portray us out to be, we're actually more united than we are divided, but we don't get that chance and that opportunity without conversations.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other thing, Angela, is that scapegoating obviously works, right? And so our foreign-born friends are scapegoats at this point. And that gets us, that allows us to be willfully ignorant sometimes, and I guess we're legitimately ignorant about some of the bigger things that is plaguing rural economies, because we're talking from the rural perspective here. And those things get more complicated. Antitrust legislation is complicated. There are bigger picture things that's pushing these economies down, and we're looking in the rural areas for easy answers. And then so we see some brown people in what's normally a white neighborhood, and we say, "Aha, that's what's changed. Those guys showed up."
It's an old trick, Hans, isn't it? Scapegoating.
Yeah. Yep.
Unfortunately. Hans Bradenmoser from Lincoln County, dairy farmer, former member of the Lincoln County Board. Thanks so much for being our guest. Great hearing from you, Hans.
Thank you very much, Matt. Good to see you again. Nice to meet you, Angela. You guys have happy holidays, okay?
You too. Happy holidays.
And we'll be right back on the Dom Salvia Show.
Hans, will we be sticking? Never mind. Matt, Angela, I will be back in 2 minutes. 1 minute. $30.
Cool.
Broadcasting across the state of Wisconsin on the Civic Media Radio Network and around the world on the Civic Media app. This is the Dom Salvia Show. And now, here's your host, Dom Salvia.
Hey, Dom's not here. I'm Matt Rothschild. I'm guest hosting along with Angela Lang from Block. I want to invite you to join the conversation, 855-752-4842. That's 855-75-CIVIC. You can call or text. I'm going to read a couple texts we've gotten. One was from Susan from McFarland, passing along her thanks to Hans. That's Hans Brayton Moser, who was our guest in the last half hour, dairy farmer from Lincoln County, advocate for fair maps, wonderful guy. Susan thanks him for being a farmer and for advocating for immigrant rights. We also got a text from Steady Eddie who says, Matt, I'm not buying the idea that meat packers, construction workers, and dairy workers must, that's all caps, I guess he's getting that from Trump, must be paid a substandard wage to make these businesses work. He goes on, Steady Eddie does, at least I know my dad made pretty good union wages with benefits, health insurance, and a pension in the meatpacking industry not that long ago. And that's, of course, part of the problem. I don't think that Hans was advocating for substandard wages, but he was saying, look, all these industries would not survive without immigrant labor right now. And the fact is that, you know, our minimum wage hasn't gone up in decades here in Wisconsin. It's unbelievable. It's still stuck at $7.25, which is not a livable wage by any stretch, barely a subsistence wage, even that. So, yeah, we got a lot of work to do to make sure that people get paid what they deserve in this country.
And the governor is going around doing his listening sessions for the budgets. And I think that could be a good opportunity. I mean, we all know. I mean, I'm not going to be naive and say that whatever the governor proposes in his budget, including raising the minimum wage, is going to be what passes. But I think it's also another opportunity to continue the conversation. And we actually, you know, our team sat down with the governor's office last week, and that was one of the things that we mentioned, is that if we want to actually tackle some of the issues in our community, you have to raise people's wages.
What are some of the other issues you raised with governor's team?
Education. I think education is important. We had talked to a lot of our coalition partners, especially a lot of teachers and folks that are doing work in the education space around the special education funding gap and how that needs to be closed. You know, I dabbled it a little bit into Representative Pocan talking about putting cops back in schools, and Milwaukee public schools are in a bit of a challenge right now, unfortunately. And, you know, we hear Robin Voss say that, you know, Milwaukee public schools may not get funded because of the cops back in schools issues and them not complying with that, unfortunately. So those are a couple of things that we had talked about. And then circling back, obviously, being able to do whatever we can to decrease mass incarceration as well.
Which leads to this question back about cops in schools. And, you know, I wanted to get your take. Again, we talked about it with Representative Pocan about the Abundant Life shooting there. And what you term the knee-jerk reaction to try to get cops in schools or metal detectors in schools. For someone who's listening thinking, well, hell, I'd rather have metal detectors in schools and cops in schools than risk the lives of our kids. How do you respond to that?
And at first, I want to say I hear that. And I want to preface this by saying that I am not a parent. I think I want to share a little bit why, as a Black woman, and I don't talk about this often, as I get older, I get more and more firm in my belief and to not have children of my own. And that's due to the state of the world,
Mm.
unfortunately. And I know a lot of parents and the fear that they have, and just try to keep your child safe. And so I understand people wanting to say, well, maybe this is what we need. We need to fortify the schools. But I actually don't think that that's enough. We need to be getting to the more root cause of the problem. Why are guns even happening in our schools to a point where we need to fortify the schools? Like, fortifying the school is still only a band-aid on actually trying to solve and tackle the problem. And we also know that this extra kind of policing in schools also has an adverse effect and just ends up putting students, and largely students of color, on the school to prison pipeline, and all the effects that happens with that as well.
Yeah, it's a tricky issue because, I know a colleague of ours or someone we've worked in coalition with who agrees with you on this issue, but she's got a couple kids, and she said every morning she hugs her kids before
Yeah.
they get on the school bus and worries whether they're going to come back. I mean, that's just got to be horrible. I mean, I raised my wife Jean and I raised three kids here in Madison, and they're grown now. But yeah, it was a concern back then too. Not so much as it is today. It's just such a
Yeah.
huge concern now. And Monday's shooting. I mean, I was talking with the father of a firefighter who was getting the bulletins as they
Mm.
were coming in. I was talking with a retired police officer whose son was a detective who was going to the scene. My wife was a school nurse for many years. I mean, it struck so close to home for those of us here in Madison this week. It's just been kind of shocking, not unexpected because like I grew up in Highland Park, Illinois, and they had that Fourth of July parade shooting there, and so
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
I know it can happen anywhere. We've just been lucky, and then we had the Mount Horeb thing that Representative
Mhm.
Pocan referenced earlier. So this is just a crisis that our country is facing. It's horrifying the number of school shootings. I mean, I almost laugh because it's just such a shocking, appalling indictment of our country that there's so many school
Yeah.
shootings going on in this country.
We need
And
to
yeah,
attack our gun culture, this like obsessive toxic culture and obsession with guns, that, if we do something about that culture, we wouldn't feel the need to have to fortify the schools. Like, our kids should be in thriving environments, not ones that feel that they're walking into a prison. That's not a healthy environment for students to actually learn and succeed. And we also seen that does not also keep students safe, because we've seen when they're school resource officers, we've seen even in Uvalde when there were police officers on the scene and they still didn't go in and act, right? And
yeah,
so
that was
having,
terrible.
we've seen that it actually doesn't work. And so again, if we really want to tackle the actual problem, it's not by putting a band-aid over and say, oh, well, at least we'll catch the guns if they come in school. No, guns shouldn't even come into schools to the point where we even need metal detectors in the first place.
Hmm. Yeah, it's such a horror to be here
Yeah.
in the wake of this shooting
Again.
here again and again and again. I also, I do want to take issue briefly with what the mayor of Madison was doing yesterday when she was scolding reporters for wanting to know
Mm.
the names of the victims. I know she was saying, uh, "Look, give people here." I'll read what she said. When the reporters were just asking for the name of the teacher who died and the name of the student who was killed, and also the substitute teacher who was wounded, and there's been no information
Yeah.
forthcoming from either the mayor's office or the police department's office, police office. Uh, Here she was saying, it's absolutely none of y'all's business who was harmed in this incident. Well, we live in this community, we live in this state.
Right.
It's been 48 hours. And I don't want to sound callous. We all feel for the families who've been impacted
Yeah.
by this, absolutely. But the families have been notified, and the public has a right to know who was impacted here. And I just think that stiff arm of the media is just not a good thing. It's not a good thing when it comes from Donald Trump, and
Yeah.
it's not a good thing when it comes from the Madison mayor. I wonder what your take on that is, Angela.
Yeah, so I I saw that clip actually on social media. It was making the rounds, and I was looking at the comments, and there was a lot of supportive comments. And for me, watching it, I was kind of surprised, but also not, because I think it was very clear that is the passion of an elected official that is grieving just like everyone else. And I think that's something to be respected. For me, I'm torn because I on one hand, I understand what she was getting at of, let the families kind of grieve, because once the names are listed, I can imagine the journalists that are going to be, not necessarily respecting their privacy, and you trying to put cameras in their faces. And so I get wanting to shield the families from that. And I think she, said it just in a very passionate way that I think was unexpected for some. But in some ways, I get where she's coming from, but I also understand that people want to move to a point of healing, and that includes knowing the names and who was impacted. Is it someone that someone knows? Is it a loved one? Is it someone who's a coworker, family member? Right? I think on one hand, people want to support the grieving families and are eager to do so. So I get the need for wanting to release the names. But when I was reflecting on it and trying to think of like why she was, saying that in that way, it's like, think about the families that, the media, and we know sometimes the media can be a little callous too. They're not always respectful in the most sensitive times. And I think if there were more instances where some media, and again, this is not Civic Media, but there's always that quote, if it bleeds, it leads. And people tend to stick cameras in people's faces in the worst times. And I think she was just trying to avoid some of that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and let me give a fuller quote from the mayor to be fair to her. Here's also what she said along the lines that Angela's been talking about right now. Please have some human decency and respect for the people who lost loved ones or were injured themselves or whose children were injured. Just have some human decency, folks. Leave them alone. Let them grieve. Let them recover. Let them heal. Don't feed off their pain. We'll share what we can when we can, and not before that. Strong statement. I think she's wrong on it as far from a First Amendment public right to know journal. I've been a journalist for 40 years. I want the information to get out. That's in my blood. But yeah, I mean, no one wants the reporter shoving that mic in the crying mother's face saying, "How do you feel?" I mean, and that's not the kind of journalism that I want to see or that we would do here at Civic Media. Whose coverage, I've got to say, I thought. Maggie did a great job the day of. I thought Todd did a great job the day of and the day after. Really hard live conversations to have, holding it together, dealing with everyone's grief, shock, anger, and handling it with real grace. I admired it a great deal. We did have a text that I'm going to want your answer for, Angela, after the break. I'm going to throw it out there, though. Metal detectors are in courthouses, airports, concert events. We say to install them, not to install them in school. Why not? So, well, I'll get your answer on that. You're listening to the Dom Salvia Show. I'm Matt Rothschild. That's Angela Lang. We're co-hosting today. Dom's off. We'll be right back.
Not to put too fine a point on it, say I'm the only bee in your bonnet. Make a little birdhouse in your soul. While you're at it, keep the light let on inside the birdhouse in your soul. Not to put too fine a point on it, say I'm the only bee in your bonnet. Make a little birdhouse in your soul. While you're at it, keep the night light on inside the birdhouse in your soul. Not to put too fine a point on it, say I'm the only bee in your bonnet. Make a little birdhouse in your soul.
30 seconds.
Hey, Matt Rothschild with you on the Dom Salvia Show. I'm guest hosting along with Angela Lang. We're handling it together, dealing with all the issues and your texts. You can text or call at 855-752-4842. That's 855-75-CIVIC. I want to tease our next guest who's going to come on after the 5:30 break, Wisconsin Poet Laureate Nick Gulig. He's been Poet Laureate for 2 years. He's got about 3 weeks left. And so I very much look forward to speaking with him for you poetry lovers out there. But we're going to continue this conversation about the shooting. I've got a couple comments on the text line. Annie from Watertown. I guess Annie's on the phone, actually. Is that right, Jess? So we'll take that call.
That is correct. All right. Annie, you're on.
Oh, okay. I think, the gun violence has immediate results that we can look at, but it's all about our values. We send our kids out the door. What are they exposed to? The rising cancer rates in children is something you don't hear about, much less what kind of planet they're going to have. And that says nothing about the psychological perversions we're doing with not only the drills they have to go through, but they're told their teachers are scum and there's lead in the water, but that's okay. And yeah, I mean, they listen, they can hear, they hear in a different way too. So what we're doing to them is bigger than the gun violence.
Yeah, Annie from Watertown, thanks for that thoughtful comment. It is a harsh world out there for our kids, much harsher than when I was growing up. And I understand what you were saying earlier, Angela, about not wanting to bring a child into this situation. It's not pretty. And, I feel for the parents. I feel for the kids. We also have a text from Cam from Appleton disagreeing with me, saying that giving the names out, if the mayor or the police chief gave the names out of the victims, that would make it so bad for the victims' digital footprint, given the day and age we live in.
Sure.
And that could be, I hear that side of the argument as well. But just as someone who likes public information to be public, this was a public event. The police is a public entity. The police has investigated and knows the names. The people, the citizens under our Constitution have a right to get that information, I believe. So I'm with Bill Leaders of the Freedom of Information Council here in Wisconsin, who says we should have the names as well. Interested in what anyone else has to say on this subject. But Angela, I said before the break, I'd give you another swing at PJ's question about metal detectors.
Yeah. So, some of the places that were kind of named in that question were, airports and courthouses. Yes, absolutely. We should have metal detectors there because those are federal, buildings and places that it's a completely different environment. It is not a learning environment. The second thing is, if a school has metal detectors, you're just going to find a different way. And unfortunately, if you are that unwell, I don't think a metal detector will stop you. But what will stop you is policies limiting your access to a firearm. That's one thing that actually stops. And the last thing that I'll mention, and I preface this by saying, in another hat, because I have all this apparently spare free time, I am vice president of the ACLU of Wisconsin. And during the break, I cheated and pulled up the ACLU statement. And what they say is metal detectors are expensive, disruptive, alienating, and come hand in hand with aggressive police tactics and have a racially disparate impact on students of color. Like other surveillance methods, they are not good for kids, and ample research suggests that metal detectors don't improve school safety. Even the U.S. Secret Service has concluded that the devices are unlikely to stop school shootings. And so if we are putting all this money into kind of fortifying a school, we also understand we're living, especially in the state of Wisconsin, in an age where our schools are being defunded. And so when we need to prioritize how we're supporting our schools, I would much rather that money go into the curriculum to make sure that students have arts and recess and gym and all of these things that are being taken away, instead of metal detectors where they feel like they're walking into a prison every single time they go into a place of learning.
Yeah, I totally get that it's not conducive to learning. We've got a text from Angie from Monroe. Every time I hear of a shooting, I tell my grandkids, eyes and ears open, I love you. Yeah, for the grandparents and the parents who are sending their kids out to school, it's just such a hard time. Here's another text from Tyler from Columbia County. As an educator, metal detectors will be impossible to install in schools without major changes. You're asking 400 plus districts to install TSA style metal detectors in all schools. Our district alone is 5 buildings processing thousands of students. Unless you want to drop off your kids at 6 or pick them up at 5, it's impossible to process. So, there's
And
the
who's going to pay
reality
for
of
it?
it. Yeah.
Who's going to pay for it?
And our schools are already broke. That's why, all these districts had to go to referendums.
We've talked about this.
schools going.
We've had so many conversations, Rep-elect Christian Phelps and, Rep Fran Hong, who have talked about education and ran on education being strong in our community and bringing funding back to our schools. If there is extra funding for our schools, it should not go to things that have already been proven to not actually work and have actually negative and harmful reactions to students as well. But and again, I want to just preface this by saying I understand why parents feel that at any means is if I understand why parents would make them metal detectors and make them feel safer given the current conditions. You want to do whatever you can to protect your child at the end of the day. When you drop them off at the bus, when they go outside, they walk to school, you want to protect them. And I think it's through these conversations that we connect the dots and actually unpack critically, some of the research and data that's out there to say that actually that's not the best solution for our kids.
And Angela, I really appreciate you bringing that data and those facts forward on this issue because it's so knee-jerk the reaction that we often have on this. Paul from Madison texts, if the victims don't want their names released, respect their right. Well, I'm not with you on that, Paul. I want the information out there. But I hear you. I understand it. I get it. You're listening to the Dom Salvia Show. I'm Matt Rothschild. I'm a guest co-host along with Angela Lang of Block. We'll be right back for a little poetry with the poet laureate of the state of Wisconsin on the Dom Salvia Show.
Hello, Nick. Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can. I'm hearing some echo. Do you have a set of headphones connected?
I do not.
Do you have a set of headphones available?
I do not.
Okay.
Let me check and ask my wife. She might. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Do we have headphones? I can put the microphone on.
How bad's the echo, Jess?
Enough that I would ask him to go to the phone.
Really? Yeah, this is my bad. Oh, here we go.
All right. Does that help?
All right, let's see. I don't hear any echo.
Is that better?
So, that is wonderful. Thanks so
Awesome.
much, Nick. All
Of
right, I'm
course.
coming back in 30 seconds.
Cool.
Traffic, that's great. Hey, Matt Rothschild with you here on the Dom Salvia Show. Dom's off today, so I've been with you for the last hour and a half, and with you for this half hour with Angela Lang, Executive Director of Black Leaders Organizing for Communities. And we have Poet Laureate Nick Gulig, Wisconsin's own Poet Laureate, on the program. First, I want to read a couple texts, and then we'll get right to some poetry or some discussion with this Poet Laureate, which is so cool, I think. So I'm in the distinct minority, evidently, for listeners, or at least texters to this show, on the question as to whether we should know the names of the victims of this terrible tragedy that happened on Monday. Paul from Madison says that the victims don't want their names released. Respect their right. Monica writes, I agree with the mayor and the person with the digital footprint comment. I think the family should direct the narrative as to how they want their loved ones remembered instead of someone digging up info that may be incorrect or incomplete. Eric from Lodi writes, I agree with the mayor and the person with the digital footprint comment. I think the family should direct.
No, that was
That's the same one.
mistake from me.
Here's
sorry,
Eric.
Matt.
I got it.
There we go.
I got it. Matt, I'm not in favor of subjecting the victims to the Alex Joneses of the world. I don't want that either. But until we can put a stop to that kind of First Amendment abuse, we'll have to respect their wishes, says Eric. But what does this mean? We're, how long are you going to wait on this? How long before, or is it never? And I don't think it's never. So then the question is, what is the time frame and all of that? But let's leave that conversation to the side and deal with something that I wanted to get to today, and that is Wisconsin Poet Laureate Nick Gulig. He's been Poet Laureate for 2 years. He just has a couple weeks left. I'm curious, Nick, First of all, thanks for joining the show.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
What's it been like to be poet laureate of the state of Wisconsin?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that it's been very busy and I'm very tired. But I'm also incredibly grateful, and especially here as I come to the end of my tenure, and I have the chance to sit and reflect on the last 2 years, which is I think something you do when something's about to be done. One of the thoughts that keeps coming back to me is this idea that traveling the state for the last 2 years and talking with people about poems has returned my state to me in many ways, and it's also unexpectedly returned my craft to me at the same time. And I think that's one of the first thoughts that comes to mind.
Return the state to you. How? Why?
Well, one of the stories that I tell and that I tell often is of returning to Wisconsin in the aftermath of my father's passing. My dad died in 2015. I was living in Thailand at the time, and at that point I decided I needed to come back to Wisconsin. I wanted to be closer to my mother, to my family after living the vast majority of my adult life away, first for school and then abroad. I was living in Thailand when he passed. And then in 2016, I had the opportunity through a job at the University of Whitewater to move back to Wisconsin. And I'm moving to Fort Atkinson in the summer of 2016. And if folks can remember what Wisconsin was like in the summer of 2016, like so much of rural America, that part of the state where I was driving through and moving to was drenched in their rhetoric and the symbols of the MAGA movement, which was then and is now deeply xenophobic amongst a cacophony of other ailments. And so, for the first time in my life, I felt like I no longer belonged in the place where I was born. And then when Trump eventually won the election, I felt even further disconnected because I'm the son of an immigrant. My wife and daughter, who I was in the process of immigrating to the United States, were immigrants. But then my community in Fort Atkinson, which was then and is now like deeply steeped in the legacy of Lori Niedecker, welcomed me. My community in Madison, which is filled with some of the best writers in the world, welcomed me. And then eventually, when I became the state's 10th laureate, the state welcomed me. I spent 2 years traveling the state and meeting people and talking to people and in corners of the state I didn't even know existed. I saw more of Wisconsin in 2 years than I saw in the 40 odd years prior. And these people welcomed me into their spaces, into their homes, into their thoughts and conversations. And through those conversations and through those encounters with people, I came to feel at home again. That was a gift I wasn't expecting when I first took on the position 2 years ago.
But it's odd because it's a book ended by Trump and by
I
MAGA.
know. It's come full circle in the worst way possible.
And how do you wrestle with that? How do you deal with that?
Deal with like Trump being president again, or just deal with
Trump being president? I live in a 10 miles south of Madison. There were a lot of Trump signs in the little subdivision I'm in. And right after the election, I felt like for the first time, I've been there 10 years, I felt like moving. I said, I can't be here anymore. It was so visceral. And it was just in my face. And I've gotten over that now, but I just wonder how you deal with that in your face.
There's a couple things I think I can say to that. The first thing I think that I should say to that is living in a small town, I have friends and neighbors who voted for Trump. And they are real friends and they are real neighbors. These are people who I know outside of the limits of their politics. I'm a person who needs to believe, I can't say if this is true or not, but I need to believe that I am bigger than my politics, and if I'm bigger than my politics, I have to grant other people the possibility of being bigger than their politics. Um, and so because I live with people who voted for Trump, and because they're a part of my life and a part of, a lot of them are my daughter's the parents of my daughter's friends, uh, and these people have been a part of my life, and I trust my children with them, and they trust their children with me, in the way that like parents who are raising children together in a community do, at our best. And so I have in my recent memory unmediated experiences with people that complicate the mega narrative. And so I lean on that a lot. That being said, it doesn't undo or lessen any of the criticisms that I have, um, of the mega movement. It complicates the movement for me in a way that I think is healthy, but it doesn't lessen my abhorrence.
And how do we get through to those people? I mean, this is similar to a conversation we had an hour ago with Hans Breitenmoser in Lincoln County, a dairy farmer who had a friend who was coming over to look at his cow's hoofs, and that guy was for Trump, and he knows that guy. He knows he's not an evil person. But how do we? What inroads can we make? I mean, you write in your poetry a lot about some of these issues, big political issues of racism and war and empire and things like that. And I'm just wondering, neighbor to neighbor, how do we get through to people?
I mean, I do not have an answer for you.
I'm looking for answers.
I
need answers for my own neighborhood too. So
for me, there's like two planes on which this conversation operates for me. There's like my day-to-day like lived experience, and then there's the way that I think about it. So there's like there's a world of things and the world of ideas, and I'm trying to hold those two things together, and they don't necessarily mesh. In the world of a thousand things, on a day-to-day basis, I treat my neighbors the way that I would want to be treated, regardless of who they are. And no one has treated me poorly. No one has treated my children poorly. I mean, not really. But then there's the world of ideas, and I think that's where I'm having the hardest struggle, because I'm very, very nervous, because I know that the world of ideas overlaps with the world of things, and it slips down into and affects, and in this case, potentially poisons. And for me, there's a thousand ways that I think about why I'm so nervous about this second presidency. And I think maybe at the top of that list is because I'm probably not the person that you want to talk to about policy. There are smarter people, more informed people to talk about what Trump's policies, what they will look like when they're enacted. But I think what I feel comfortable talking with y'all about is the anxiety I have over the extent to which I think Trump is a narcissist. And I think that sometimes when we say that, we say it as a way to kind of deflect our fear or deflect the criticism that Trump might be a fascist, which for the record is a fear that I harbor. But I'm not saying that I find solace in his narcissism. And nor do I find solace in a population who worships at the feet of a narcissist. And that, I think, is what scares me the most. It's very, very clear to me that Trump cares first and foremost about himself, that he sees himself as the center around which the world turns and as the lens through which the world should be organized. And then the question that immediately comes to the forefront of my anxieties is something like along the lines of like, what then does that say about a people who turn to a man who embodies the promise of a world that's organized around one's desires as a kind of almost like messianic figure like that terrifies me. My fear here is that it says that millions of Americans might also want to organize the world around their own desires. And if that's true, or even if that's true to a degree, it signifies to me that we have, to a degree, abandoned both the promise and the complications of our connections and relationships to other people. And if we worship a man like that, it tells me that we've come to see the world in terms that feel fundamentally antithetical to the project of community, that we've opted for the illusion of our isolation over and above the reality and the responsibility of our relationships. And I have a hard time trying to convince myself to be hopeful in a world where that's the case. If everyone and everything that isn't I is understood as less than and in the way of I don't know where we begin. I don't know what there is really to work with. And I think Trump's rise to the precipice of culture has in many ways emptied my faith in culture. And that's a problem for an artist because it's my responsibility to participate in and contribute to culture. And I'm left with trying first and foremost how to sustain a faith in that.
Nick Gulig, we're going to pick that up in just a minute as we go to break on the Dom Salvia Show.
"30 seconds."
Hey, Matt Rothschild with you on the Dom Salvia Show. Dom, we'll be back tomorrow. I'm guest hosting along with Angela Lang of Block, and we have Nick Gulick, the Wisconsin Poet Laureate over the last 2 years. Nick is the author of 4 books, North of Order, Book of Lake, Orient, and most recently, The Other Altar. He teaches at UW Whitewater, and his students have got to be lucky because what you've been giving us here has been really deep. And a couple of the texters agree. Larry from Deerfield Text, thanks for having our Wisconsin Poet Laureate on the show. And again, maybe a regular Poet's Corner would be a good addition to the show going forward. We also have Todd saying the guest's words are very powerful. Thank you for this. Before the break, Nick, you were talking about, ironically, losing faith in art, and you're an artist. You're a poet, obviously. And you write in your book, Orient, art has already walked the violent path of apathy. And then you have a poem called The Path of Apathy. I love that line. I'd like you to explain it.
I think in that book, Orient, and I think that line is a good line to think about it, to think about what the book is trying to think about as a whole. And it's thinking about war generally, and more specifically, I'm at that moment in time, I'm watching the civil war in Syria kind of unfold across my various screens in real time. I'm thinking about war, I'm thinking about empire, I'm thinking about racism. And when I think about those things, I think the clearest way I've found of thinking about them is as related extensions or expressions of each other, but more generally of an economic system that centers experience around the accumulation of capital. It's a system that asks us to understand ourselves and to understand our relationship to other people and to the world around us through an economically dominated lens. And I think that when we do that, war, empire, and racism kind of bloom out of that way of understanding ourselves in relationship to the world. Like, from a historical perspective, we developed these racial narratives in the first place in order to justify the forms of violence that we needed to perpetuate in order to extract resources from other people and other places in the world. And so for me, to that degree, the project and the purpose of empire, which is to procure capital and thus procure power, is only possible through narratives that elevate the colonizing culture over and above the culture being colonized. So war, racism, empire, you could add words to that list.
But you got to have counter narratives too, though, and that's what you're trying to do, right?
Well, trying is the right word. I don't know.
And not just you alone. There's a group of intellectuals and writers and artists and singers and cultural workers who are trying to offer a different vision of the world.
Of course. And the question for me then as a poet, if that's the case, like, how do I not only, like, what is the counter narrative that I construct, but for me really as a poet, it's like how do I construct that narrative? Like, for me, the question as a poet isn't to complicate that narrative. I need, as a poet, as an artist, I need to do that complication at a level that's larger than just the subject. Like, but
I mean, is this like Audre Lorde saying you can't take down the master's house using the master's tools? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, I'm an English speaker, so I use them. I mean, my tools are the master's tools. I don't know another language. Sure. Like English is my medium. I think what I mean is, like, for me, for example, to say something like "down with Donald Trump" as a line in a poem is to fail to challenge the medium in at least two really important ways. First and foremost, when I say something like that, I'm saying something that I'm insisting is the case, which is, said differently, is like to insist on meaning as something that is fixed and understood, and more specifically is understood by me. And when I write like this, I'm treating the poem as a vehicle for myself, for self, and for a version of the world that myself insists upon. When I write like that, and I oftentimes do in my early drafts, the poem gets turned into gets turned into a means to an ends. And so its value as a thing in the world, or as an action in the world, maybe becomes dependent and is thus like subservient to the self that seeks to use it as a way to impose order. And that brings me to the second problem, because when you're explaining to your audience that Trump sucks or whatever, you're actually taking authority away from them. You're relegating them to a position of passive consumption, and you're treating them as a receptacle for truth, and you're the one who holds that truth, and you're the one dispensing it. And this elevates the speaker over and above the listener, which to me feels like completely complicit and in line with the project of empire. And so to me, when I write like that, when my poems become like monstrous with politics to that degree, that I worry that they become a different version of the same thing. Because
Nick, I'm gonna have to hold you there because we're
course.
running out of time.
Yeah.
But I take hope in what you wrote in Orient. Perhaps the only task is listen, translate, speak. I thought that was a really beautiful line, and I want to thank you for being my guest today, our guest today. I want to thank the callers and the texters. Angela, I want to thank you. It's always great doing this with you.
Of course.
And Jess, thanks so much for bringing us through this. It's always great working with you as well. Dom will be back tomorrow. Everyone be safe and have a nice holiday.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.
When we built these dreams on sand, how they all slip through our hands. And this might be our only chance. Let's take this one day at a time. I'll hold your hand if you hold mine. The time that we kill keeps us alive.
Aaron Z.